I am also using the word called religion so that people better understand. So that is why a lot of people try to bracket the Hinduism into a sect, into a creed, into a follower-oriented philosophy. But anybody who is a practicing Hindu will know we are more than that. We don't belong to a sect, we are much more than that. We treat the whole world as one unit. We treat all human beings the same. We don't ascribe a caste or a creed or even a small linguistic differences we might have. The Britishers conveniently had administrative divisions. The Britishers conveniently classified caste into scheduled, into notified, into upper, into lower. So the last 200 years, there is a certain deviation in the pattern of our lives. Now all the 20 great people whom we honored at the stage and all the great people are sitting in the stage, all of us are making that effort to rightfully tell the world what our way of life, what our Hinduism means. And we all know Mahabharata is such a big epic. In its classic form, Mahabharata is more than 1,00,000 verses. But if I take only the Jaya part of Mahabharata, which is about 8,800 verses, what many people mistakenly call Mahabharata, the battlefield where Sanjaya was trying to describe to King Dhritarashtra what is happening. If I take only that 8,800 verse, even in that 8,800 verse, if I take only the Bhishma Parva, if I take only that, even in that Bhishma Parva, if I take only from chapter 6 to chapter 13, even in that, I take only from verse 6 of chapter 6 to verse 37 of chapter 13, then we all know what Bharata Kanta is. I'm talking of an epic written 5,500 years back in its classic beauty, which describes Bharata Kanta, where Sanjaya keeps describing, because he had this divine vision that was gifted to him. He says this is a land. It describes the north and south. It describes the ocean. He goes in detail because he has to describe it from chapter 6 to chapter 16. He has to go for 10 chapters. He describes very deeply. This is a land which has got 220 kingdoms. And he mentions the name of the kingdoms, the kings. The Swamiji was mentioning, Sanatana Swamiji was mentioning about Kalinga. He mentions everything. Not only that, he goes one step further. He also mentions 80 mountain ranges, which is present across Bharat. Sanjaya goes again very deep into it. He mentions the 30 big lakes. He mentions the 30 big forests. He doesn't stop there. He goes still further. He mentions all the 300 pilgrim sites that we have. We are talking of an epic which is 5,500 years back in absolute pristine detail. From a lake to a mountain to a pilgrim center to the border, it fixes everything. Sanjaya in his divine version keeps talking. And for anybody in our country who is questioning whether Bharat as an entity is whole, or there is an artificial divide between north and south, east and west, or northeast, are we culturally the same, or genetically are we different? I only tell them, even the blind king was able to understand from Sanjaya what he was describing. Now a lot of politicians, even with their eyes on, they just have to understand this was always a classic Bharat and it will continue to be a Bharat. We might have minor differences in terms of our speaking ability or a language or the food habit or the custom, but this is Bharata Varsha, the Bharata country. Now this is where we practice Sanatana dharma more than any other part. Since I mentioned Kannanji, since I mentioned Corona, if you look at the world statistics, some of the advanced Western democracies have perfectly functioning health model. And we have a former chief secretary who's sitting in the stage, he knows it better than all of us. Perfectly functioning healthcare system. If you look at per 1 lakh people, which country had the highest death rate, we can directly equate that to some of the best so-called Western democracies, which had the healthcare model. Americans had one of the highest death rates for 1 lakh people. Some of the countries in Europe had the highest death rates. Countries like Italy, countries like Spain, which essentially the healthcare system collapsed. But they said, when Corona started in 2020, Jan, they said, oh, we are worried about India. The whole world is worried about India. WHO is worried about India. They made statements, such a big country, 140 crore population, which doesn't have the best healthcare model. I am wondering how many deaths India will have. People are calculating crore deaths, multiple crore deaths, but we are the lowest death in the world. Why? The question is why? And you must be very surprised when the lockdown of 30-40 days happened, when all of us were inside our home. Have you seen any dog dying in the street? We haven't seen a dog dying in the street. Have you seen even a squirrel dying? No. you seen a small bird that is dying in the street? No. Have you seen a pigeon which we keep feeding in big cities? Have you seen a pigeon dying? No. Did we see a street cat or a dog dying? No. Because Sanatana Dharma was a classic action during Corona period. We took care of every single person. We took care of the animate and so-called inanimate things. Even the dog in the street, even the neighbor's cat, if they were not there. And people came out. That is the truest sense. And we have seen a lot of our neighbors behaving abnormally, within quotation, because that was the normal Sanatana Dharma in action. In this hurry-burry industrialist world, night engineers to manufacturing, morning 8 o'clock packing, going to the office, coming back at 9 o'clock. So lot of us have lost our moral self. It is during COVID, many of us found what our true moral compass was. If we go back, and human beings, we tend to forget very easily. Now we have crossed COVID at 4 years. Many of us have forgotten COVID. But if we take us back to 2021, we know that was a classic Sanatana Dharma in action. We cared about people, we gave food, we put a mask, we took that risk to go to a hospital, cook food in our home, go and serve in the queue, we served it. We did everything possible. Somebody like Mr. Kannan, COVID, body, there is a virus, nobody knows. Even the health workers were they were dying. But somebody bravely going there, 100 bodies, not one, not two, not three, hundreds of bodies trying to do the final things. The point I'm trying to communicate here is, as long as we don't forget what binds us as human beings, as long as we are aware that there is a dharma, there is an underlying dharma that is above the so-called CRPC, so-called IPC, it's an unseen dharma which is binding all of us, which keeps a sense of righteousness. When any adharma anywhere comes, the dharma always balances it by its own action. And people will always come when there is a need for people, like Krishna Paramatma said. If we have this underlying sense, our life will always be in order. And also I see a lot of young children here, and it is important that we understand. People have given their life to protect, to enhance this dharma. It is not that this dharma is there for the last many years. It will continue to be there for the many years. If I look back at the history, if you look at the Ottomans and the Turks and the Arabs, from 2nd and 3rd century when they started their conquest across the world, in about 3 centuries they were able to conquer about 70% of the world. They were literally on the border of Kashmir from 6th century. From 6th century, the Arabs and the Turks were on the border. But you'll be wondering, for almost 600 years they were stopped from entering our Bharat. Almost 600 years. After 600 years of fight, they were able to enter Bharat. Kings like Lalitaditya, Kashmiri king from 6th and 7th century, they stood there, protected the border. They never cared about Kashmir. They always had that vision of Bharat. They never thought about one line, one geographical boundary. Again, if you go slightly deep, when the Dutch wanted to come, Martanda Varma, the Kolachal king, probably the first guy in the whole world, taking on the mighty Dutch in the high seas, defeating them in the Battle of Kolachal. Again, if you see kings after king, the Cholas, who always had a sense of world, who always had a sense of Bharat. The Mahabharatas and the Ramayanas that we talk now, I was asking somebody today, they said, I am in Vietnam day after tomorrow for a Ramayana session. If any of us travel to the Far East countries, we see different countries now, including Vietnam, the present day Myanmar, the Cambodia, even the kings who come in. It is a sense of Ramayana, Ramakathe they sung, and the king comes and takes their crown. Very classically, you can see Thailand. Every time a new king comes, it is the mantras from Ramayana, the Vedic mantras that is spoken before the king crowns themselves. We see this Sanatana Dharma was taken far and wide by the kings, especially the Cholas, who were in the southern part of our country. They have taken it very deep, and they made it a way of life. And this is something that we always have to acknowledge. We always have to understand that kings have stood at the altar of history protecting this dharma. Lot of monks and saints, the great Adi Shankaracharya is here at a difficult time for the Sanatana Dharma, when Sanatana Dharma existence was itself threatened. He had to journey across Bharat not once, not twice, thrice, 4 times. He had to journey across our country, going from pilgrim center to pilgrim center, using Darga Sastra, arguing with people trying not to conquer, only trying to tell them what the other side of the argument was. Establish all the great pitas, including the Sringeri Peeth, in which many of us are followers and devotees, in which we are enjoying this continuation of Sanatana Dharma.